Claude Opus 4.8 has a 14-point lower hallucination rate than Opus 5. That's 35.9% versus 50%. And the newer model is actually less reliable on factual accuracy, which honestly shocked me when I first pulled those numbers. Both models just dropped from Anthropic. People are already paying the same price for both, and you need to know which one to actually use. I'm running Claude Opus 5 versus Claude Opus 4.8 across 5 real tests, cross-checked against verified sources with zero vendor spin. What stuck with me after going through all the data: if you're doing code review or any kind of factual work, the newer model might actually be the wrong call. And the answer comes down to one number. This one's for you. If you're on a Claude Pro or Max plan, deciding whether to move your workflows over to Opus 5, or if you're running API calls at scale and need to know if the upgrade actually buys you anything real. Pricing is identical, so the only question is capability, and that's exactly what I'm going to figure out. Test 1 is reasoning speed and latency, and I want you to think about what it actually feels like when a model is slow. You're sitting there waiting 68 seconds for a first token on a complex task, your whole agentic pipeline stalls, and you start wondering if it even started. Okay, so I looked at everything I could find here, and honestly, there's almost nothing to work with. One community reported run Claude Opus 5 at 68 seconds, the first token at max effort, but there's no comparable number for Opus 4.8 at all. And both models claim up to 2.5 times speed in fast mode, but that's just vendor copy with no measured figures behind it. I was expecting at least one clean latency number, and what I got was a single community run and a bunch of marketing claims. So this one's a tie. Scoreboard sits at 0 for Opus 5, 0 for Opus 4.8, with one tied, and you have to get your hands dirty and test speed in your own workflow. Test 2 is context window and document handling. And when your context window is too small, the model starts forgetting earlier parts of your document, it hallucinates connections that aren't there, and you end up chopping a 300-page report into chunks and babysitting the whole thing manually. What surprised me here is how clean this data actually is. On paid Claude plans, Pro and Max, Opus 5 gives you 1 million tokens versus Opus 4.8's 500,000. A straight 2x, though I want to flag this, is a consumer tier win only, because on the API, both models get 1 million tokens. So if you're building on the API, this doesn't move the needle. Honestly, I expected both models to be at parity here since they're in the same product family. But Opus 5 doubles the consumer context window and takes this one clearly. Opus 5 leads 1 to 0 with one still tied from the speed round. Test 3 is accuracy on specialized tasks. And this is the one that actually keeps me up at night when I'm thinking about production workflows. Because a model that confidently gives you a wrong answer in a code review or a legal summary doesn't just waste your time, it ships bugs or gets you sued. And a 14-point hallucination gap is a real dollar cost, not a benchmark nerd stat. So this is the most interesting data point in the whole comparison. On the AA Omniscience hallucination benchmark, Opus 4.8 scores 35.9%, and Opus 5 comes in at 50%, and lower is better. So Opus 4.8 is 14 points more reliable, though I take it with a grain of salt because these come from different sources. Press data for 4.8 and a community blog for 5, so they're not perfectly comparable. I was expecting the newer model to be better across the board, and the hallucination data just flips that assumption, so Opus 4.8 wins test 3, and it wins it by a lot, because 14 points is not a rounding error. That ties the overall score. Opus 5 at 1, Opus 4.8 at 1, with the speed round still tied. Test 4 is cost and pricing, and the failure mode here is pretty specific. You assume the newer flagship model costs more, you build your budget around that, and then you're either overpaying because you didn't check or leaving a better model on the table because you thought you couldn't afford it. And wrong price assumptions are expensive in a way that sneaks up on you. All right, so I pulled up the pricing page, and what I found is pretty wild. Both models are literally the same price, $5 per million input tokens, $25 per million output, no difference. And on the API, a 900,000 token prompt costs the same per token as a 9,001 for Opus 5. So there's no long context penalty on the API either. Now, I want to flag something before we call this a clean tie. Opus 5 does have batch and fast mode pricing tiers that Opus 4.8 doesn't have published equivalents for, so it's not totally apples to apples. And if you're running high volume batch jobs, you'd want to check Opus 5's batch rates specifically before assuming parity across every pricing scenario. Honestly, I was expecting Opus 5 to cost more, new flagship, bigger context window, big claims, but nope, same price. So this one's a tie, and the running score stays at Opus 5 1, Opus 4.8 1. And now 2 tests tied, which means the upgrade is free on cost, and that changes the calculus a lot. Test 5 is real-world production gains, and this is where benchmark scores don't translate to production and actual output quality takes over, because the failure mode is you pick a model based on numbers, ship it, and your users start complaining because it burns extra turns on every task, and that extra token spend adds up fast. What surprised me going through this data is that both models have genuinely impressive case studies, but none of them go head to head. Opus 4.8 reportedly uses 15% fewer turns and 35% fewer output tokens than its predecessor on GDP-Val AA, which is interesting, but that's versus Opus 4.7, not Opus 5. And Opus 5's frontier task demos are vendor reported with no Opus 4.8 comparison at all. I was expecting at least one real production comparison between these two, and what I got was two separate sets of vendor stories that never cross paths. So no winner, another tie, and the final scoreboard is Opus 5 1, Opus 4.8 1, 3 tied, which honestly tells you exactly what kind of comparison this is. So here's where Claude Opus 5 wins outright. The consumer context window is 1 million tokens versus 500,000 on Pro and Max plans, a straight double, and there's no long context penalty on the API, so a 900,000 token prompt costs the same per token as a short one. And the frontier reasoning claims are big, even if they're not directly compared to 4.8 yet. Now here's where Claude Opus 4.8 wins outright. The hallucination rate is 35.9% versus Opus 5's 50%. And that 14-point gap is the only direct comparison I found. Opus 4.8 also has a published 88.6% on SWE bench verified for coding tasks, while Opus 5 has nothing comparable, and its efficiency gains of 35% fewer output tokens per task mean lower costs in practice. I went into this expecting Opus 5 to sweep, and the data just didn't cooperate. 1 win each, 3 ties. So here's the decision rule. If you're on Pro or Max and working with long documents, go Opus 5, because that 1 million context window is real. If you're doing code review, factual research, or anything where a wrong answer costs you, go Opus 4.8, because 14 points lower hallucination is not a number you ignore.